She never raised her voice. Not once, in 4 years of teaching second lieutenants how to land an F-16 without bending the gear. That was the thing everyone at Holloman remembered about Captain Emily Foster, the quiet. Not the kind that meant nothing was there. The kind that meant something was being held very still. The New Mexico heat came up off the tarmac in waves that morning, bending the horizon into something liquid. Emily stood at the edge of the flight line in her flight suit, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a coffee going cold in her left hand. Her right hand rested, out of habit, over a thin white scar that ran along her collarbone, the kind of scar nobody asks a flight instructor about, because instructors don't have scars like that. A crew chief jogged past her without slowing. "Morning, Captain Foster." She nodded. That was the extent of most conversations she had before 9 a.m. At 0847, a staff car pulled onto the flight line, which never happened. Base cars stayed off the tarmac. This one didn't stop until it was 30 feet from her. A man she'd never met stepped out holding a manila folder stamped in red ink she was too far away to read yet. He looked at a clipboard, then at her, then back at the clipboard, like the two didn't match. "Captain Foster?" he called out. She set the coffee down on a fuel cart. "That's me. Before we go any further, if you're enjoying this so far, drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from, hit that subscribe button, and give this video a like. It really does help. Now, back to the story, because Emily Foster was about to find out her quiet life was over. The man introduced himself as Major Dave Hoffman, out of a wing she didn't recognize by its patch. He didn't offer a handshake. He held out the folder instead, like it was something he wasn't sure he wanted to touch. "Orders came down an hour ago," he said. "Your wheels up by 1400. Emily didn't open the folder yet. "Wheels up to where, Major?" "That's classified until you're airborne." He said it flatly, the way men say things they'd practiced saying. "What I can tell you is the mission requires a pilot rated on the F-16's reconnaissance variant, current on low-altitude terrain following systems, and cleared for a specific communications protocol." He paused, looked her over, the instructor patches, the sun-faded suit, the coffee stain on her sleeve. "Which is strange, because you're listed as an instructor." "I am an instructor." "Then there's a mistake in the tasking order." He almost smiled, like he'd solved something. "Ma'am, this mission isn't for instructors." Something in Emily's face didn't move. That was the part Hoffman would remember later and not be able to explain. She didn't flinch, didn't bristle, didn't do any of the things people did when they were caught somewhere they didn't belong. She reached out and took the folder from his hand. "Who cut these orders, Major?" "Command. Above my pay grade to question them. Which is why I need you to hand that folder back and let me sort this mess out before you waste a slot on the aircraft." Emily looked down at the seal on the folder. It wasn't a training command seal. It wasn't even a seal she was supposed to recognize anymore, not after 4 years of pretending she didn't. "You're not sorting anything out," she said quietly. "You're going to want to read that folder again, Major. All the way to the second page." She turned and started walking toward base ops, folder under her arm, leaving Hoffman standing on the tarmac holding nothing but a clipboard and a growing, uneasy feeling that he'd already lost an argument he hadn't finished having. Base ops was cooler than the tarmac by maybe 15 degrees, and twice as loud with radio traffic. Emily walked past 3 enlisted airmen who straightened without quite knowing why, the way people do around someone who isn't performing anything, isn't asking for anything, and is somehow still the most certain person in the room. She found an empty briefing table near the back and opened the folder. Page 1 was routine, call sign assignment, aircraft tail number, a departure window. Ordinary tasking language. She barely read it. She'd read 1,000 pages like it. Page 2 was not routine. Her eyes moved down a redacted paragraph, then stopped on 4 words that hadn't been spoken to her in 4 years, prior operational designation confirmed. Beneath it, in smaller text, a single line that would have meant nothing to Hoffman and meant everything to her, Radio call sign on file, Wraith. She closed the folder without changing her expression. Behind her, Hoffman had followed her in, still holding his clipboard like a shield. "Captain, I don't know what game you're playing, but I need that mission slot back. I've got a fully qualified." "You've got a fully qualified pilot who's never flown low-level terrain following through hostile radar coverage without a wingman," Emily said, not turning around. "I read the tasking order too, Major. I know exactly what they're asking for. That's the problem. You don't." Hoffman opened his mouth, then closed it. Something about the way she said hostile radar coverage, clinically, like a checklist item and not a threat, made the back of his neck go cold. An older technical sergeant near the comm desk had gone very still, staring at the folder in Emily's hand like he recognized something about it he wasn't supposed to say out loud. "Ma'am," he said carefully. "Is that a Wraith tasking?" Emily didn't answer him directly. She just looked at Hoffman. "You wanted to know why the orders have my name on them, Major. Sit down. I'll tell you exactly as much as I'm allowed to." She didn't sit. She stood at the head of the table, and for the first time since he'd met her 20 minutes ago, Hoffman saw something shift behind her eyes, not softness leaving, exactly, but something underneath it stepping forward. "6 years ago I flew reconnaissance variants out of a base I'm not going to name, for a program that officially doesn't exist," she said. "I did 71 sorties. Some of them are still classified above your clearance. When it ended, I asked for reassignment somewhere quiet. They gave me instructor duty at Holloman and sealed my file under a designation that only unseals for one specific type of tasking. This type of tasking," the technical sergeant said quietly, from across the room. "This type of tasking," Emily agreed. Hoffman finally sat down, mostly because his legs seemed to want him to. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Because it wasn't supposed to matter again. Programs like this only reopen a file when there's exactly one qualified pilot left and no time to spin up a second one." She tapped the folder once. "There's a downed reconnaissance asset near a border corridor I'm not going to describe out loud in a room with the door open. The retrieval window is under 6 hours. The terrain rules out a slower platform. The radar coverage rules out anyone who hasn't flown that corridor before. And you've flown it before." "I've flown it 14 times. The room had gone quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when people stop pretending they weren't listening. Somewhere behind Hoffman, a young airman had frozen mid-step with a stack of folders in his hands, staring at Emily like he was trying to reconcile the woman who'd taught his landing pattern class on Tuesday with whatever this was. Hoffman looked down at his clipboard, then back up at her, and for the first time his voice lost its edge. "Captain, Wraith, I need to know. Can you actually do this?" Emily picked her coffee back up off the fuel cart through the window, cold now, and didn't answer right away. "Get me to the jet, Major," she finally said. "You'll have your answer in the air." The walk to the hangar took 4 minutes. It felt longer. Word had already moved faster than either of them. By the time they reached the flight line, a small cluster of ground crew and 2 of her own former students had gathered near the F-16, not quite working, not quite watching, caught somewhere in between. One of the cadets, a kid named Ryan she'd failed on his first instrument check and passed on his second, stared at her like he was seeing a stranger wearing his instructor's face. "Captain Foster," he said, half a question. She didn't stop walking. "Debrief's not until Thursday, Ryan." A crew chief was already running through the walk-around when she reached the jet, calling numbers off a checklist in the fast, clipped rhythm of someone who'd been told to move quickly and didn't fully understand why. Hoffman jogged the last few steps to catch up with her. "Radio protocol," he said, lowering his voice even though there was no one close enough to hear but her. The tasking mentioned a specific comm signature. "I don't have clearance to brief you on it." "You don't need to." Emily pulled her hair back and reached for the helmet a young airman held out to her, hand slightly unsteady. "I wrote the protocol." Hoffman blinked. "You? 6 years ago. Before it had a classification level, it had a name. Mine. She checked the helmet strap, methodical, unhurried, while 3 feet away a ground crew sergeant was radioing ahead to clear the runway on a timeline nobody in this hangar had used in years. You wanted to know why the mission wasn't for instructors, Major. It's not. It never was. It was for Wraith. I just spent 4 years teaching under a different name. She swung up onto the boarding ladder, paused 1 step below the cockpit, and looked back down at him. Not unkindly, but with the flat, settled calm of someone who had made peace with a version of herself she'd tried very hard to leave on the ground. "Get me a fuel load for the corridor profile," she said. "And Major, whatever you were about to say to stop me back there. Don't. We're past that now." She disappeared into the cockpit, and the canopy began its slow, mechanical seal. The cockpit closed around her the way it always had, not like a cage, like a second skin. Emily ran her hands over switches she hadn't touched in operational sequence for 4 years, and her fingers remembered before her mind caught up. Master arm. Nav system. Radar altimeter. Muscle memory doesn't forget, even when a person tries very hard to make it. Outside, on the ground, Hoffman stood with his clipboard forgotten at his side, watching the canopy seal shut over a woman he'd tried to send home 20 minutes ago. Her headset crackled. "Wraith, this is Holloman Command. Confirm comm signature." Emily closed her eyes for half a second. It had been 6 years since anyone had said those words to her over a radio. "Command, this is Wraith." Her voice came out steady, low, unfamiliar even to her own ears, the voice of someone she used to be. Signature confirmed. Requesting clearance for immediate departure, corridor profile Bravo 7. A pause on the other end, longer than protocol allowed. Someone on the ground was checking, double-checking, calling someone above their pay grade. Wraith, Holloman Command. Clearance granted. Godspeed. The engine spooled up beneath her, a low building roar that she felt in her chest before she heard it in her ears. Through the canopy, she caught one last look at the flight line. Hoffman, motionless, the technical sergeant, hand half raised in something between a wave and a salute, Ryan, still standing where she'd left him, watching his instructor become someone else entirely. She didn't wave back. There wasn't time, and there was something in her that had already left the ground before the wheels had. The jet rolled onto the runway. Somewhere over the radio, faint under the noise, she heard Hoffman's voice cut back in. "Wraith, good luck out there." She didn't answer. She was already gone. 40 minutes later she crossed into contested airspace at 412 feet, low enough that the desert floor blurred into a gray-brown smear beneath her, low enough that the terrain-following radar was working harder than the autopilot she'd deliberately switched off. She flew it by hand. She always had. "Wraith, this is Overwatch." A new voice now, tighter, further forward, closer to whatever was waiting for her at the end of this corridor. Downed asset call sign is Hatchet 2. Last known position approximately 11 miles ahead, marked by an emergency beacon. No confirmed comms with the crew in the last 40 minutes. Copy, Overwatch. 11 miles, no comms. Emily's voice was flat, clinical, the voice of a woman reading a checklist and not a life or death countdown. What's the threat picture? Mobile radar unit reported active in the last hour, grid coordinates uncertain. Recommend you stay below 1,000 feet through the whole corridor. Copy. I'm already 30 feet under your recommendation. A short pause. Copy that, Wraith. The jet shuddered slightly as she banked hard around a ridgeline, the wingtip close enough to the rock face that a less experienced pilot would have pulled up out of instinct. Emily didn't. She'd flown this exact terrain enough times that the ridge was less a hazard and more a landmark, something to bank around the way you'd take a familiar turn on a road you've driven 1,000 times. Her radar warning receiver chirped once, a brief tone, gone almost before it registered. She logged it without reacting. Somewhere below her, in the heat and dust, a radar operator had just gotten a half-second flicker of an aircraft that wasn't supposed to exist on this corridor, moving too low and too fast to lock. Overwatch, radar contact, brief, no lock. Continuing profile. On the ground, in a command tent she'd never see, a captain who'd never heard the name Wraith before this morning turned to his commanding officer and asked the question everyone eventually asked. Who is this pilot? 9 miles out, the beacon signal sharpened into a steady, insistent pulse on her instrument panel, Hatchet 2, exactly where Overwatch had said it would be, tucked into a shallow ravine that would have been invisible from anything but this altitude. Overwatch, Wraith. Visual on the beacon. I don't have eyes on survivors yet. Copy, Wraith. Be advised, extraction team is 9 minutes behind you. You are not tasked to land. Repeat, you are not tasked to land. Your mission is reconnaissance and cover only. Emily didn't answer immediately. She banked low over the ravine, close enough now to see the wreckage, a downed reconnaissance drone, not a manned aircraft, its fuselage cracked open against a rock outcrop, one wing torn away entirely. And beside it, unmistakably, 2 figures. Moving. Alive. Her jaw tightened, just slightly, the only outward sign that anything about this had changed. Overwatch, be advised. I have 2 survivors on the ground, mobile, no visible cover. If that radar unit gets a fix on this position before extraction arrives, they're exposed. Copy, Wraith. Understood. Maintain overhead cover, do not engage unless. The radar warning receiver chirped again. Longer this time. A lock tone, brief, breaking, then locking again. Overwatch, I have a radar lock. Repeat, active lock, bearing 220 from my position, range approximately 6 miles. A burst of noise flooded the frequency, someone talking over someone else, the sound of a command tent suddenly moving fast. Emily's hands didn't shake. She rolled the jet hard, dropping another 100 feet, putting her own aircraft between the threat bearing and the 2 figures crouched in the ravine below. Wraith, that's a surface-to-air site, we did not have that flagged. I'm aware, Overwatch. Her voice hadn't changed pitch at all. I need those extraction birds to move faster than 9 minutes. I can hold this position, but not indefinitely. She banked again, tighter, her whole focus narrowing down to a single, clean, terrible calculation, how long she could stay between a missile site and 2 men on the ground before something had to give. Wraith, Overwatch. Extraction now at 7 minutes. Recommend you break contact and return to safe altitude. Negative, Overwatch. Emily's eyes stayed locked on the radar warning display, on the threat bearing that hadn't wavered in almost a minute now, patient, waiting. If I break contact, that radar has an unobstructed line on the ravine. I'm not leaving them exposed for 7 minutes. Below her, one of the survivors. A young staff sergeant with a bloodied arm pressed against the rock wall, had gone still, staring up at the aircraft cutting slow, deliberate circles above him like he couldn't quite believe someone had actually stayed. In the command tent, the same captain who'd asked who was this pilot 20 minutes ago was now leaning over a comm operator's shoulder, watching a radar plot with his jaw set tight. She's holding position over an active SAM threat with no clearance to engage, he said, mostly to himself. That's not reconnaissance. That's not cover. That's what Wraith does, the operator said quietly, not looking up from his screen. Sir, I pulled her file when the tasking order flagged red. You don't want to know what her old sortie count looks like. The radar lock tone chirped a 3rd time, longer, more insistent, the missile site refining its solution. Wraith, that's a hard lock, you need to break now. Not yet. Emily's voice didn't rise. If anything it dropped, quieter, more controlled, the way it always did when things got worse instead of better. She banked the jet into a tight, punishing turn, chaff scattering behind her in a bright metallic bloom, buying herself 3 seconds, maybe 4. Extraction, what's your ETA? 4 minutes, Wraith. Copy. I can give you 4 minutes. She didn't sound like she was hoping. She sounded like she was doing math, and the math, for now, was still on her side. The next 4 minutes did not feel like 4 minutes. Emily flew a pattern that had no name in any manual, not evasive enough to abandon the ravine, not steady enough to let the radar sight finish its solution. She threaded a line between the two, close and closer, chaff bursts marking her path across the sky like breadcrumbs she wasn't sure she'd be able to follow back. Wraith, radar signature just intensified. They may be transitioning to launch. Copy. A beat. Extraction ETA? 90 seconds. That's not fast enough, Overwatch. She dropped the nose, dove hard toward the deck, close enough to the ravine floor that the staff sergeant below instinctively ducked even though the jet was nowhere near him. It was instinct, not logic, the kind of flying that made ground crews' stomachs drop even when they knew, technically, that the pilot knew exactly what she was doing. She leveled out at 200 feet, engine screaming, and for 1 suspended second the radar warning tone went silent. Not cleared. Silent. Which was worse? Overwatch, I've lost the tone. I don't know if that's good or... The missile launch warning replaced it a half-second later, a different tone entirely, sharper, more urgent, and somewhere in the command tent a room full of people who'd never met Emily Foster stopped breathing at the same time. Emily didn't stop breathing. She rolled the jet hard right, pulled flare countermeasures, and put the aircraft into a maneuver that existed in exactly one place, the muscle memory of 71 sorties she wasn't supposed to remember anymore. Command, she said, calm as a checklist, calm as a woman reading out fuel numbers on a Tuesday afternoon flight lesson. Hold on. This is the part I'm actually good at. The flares bloomed behind her in a spray of white-hot light, and the missile, a shoulder-launched heat-seeker, not the larger radar-guided threat she'd braced for, veered off course, chasing false heat into empty sky before spending itself against the desert floor in a small, distant flash. Emily didn't celebrate. She banked back toward the ravine before the flash had even finished fading, because a missed shot only meant one thing in her experience: there was probably a second one behind it. Overwatch, missile defeated. I say again, missile defeated. That wasn't the SAM site, that was a man-portable system, closer than we thought. Copy, Wraith, that changes the threat picture. There could be ground personnel near the ravine. I'm aware. Her eyes swept the terrain below, the rocks, the scrub brush, the long shadows that could hide a man carrying a launcher on his shoulder. Extraction, I need you here now. I can't hold this indefinitely, and if there's someone on the ground with a second tube, next time I might not see it coming. 60 seconds out, Wraith. 60 seconds. She'd survived worse windows on worse days. But this jet wasn't built to loiter low and slow forever, and she could feel the fuel gauge creeping toward a number she didn't like. She dropped altitude one more time, buzzing the ravine at 150 feet. Not tactically necessary anymore, but a message, the kind of message a pilot sends to two frightened men on the ground who have no idea whether anyone is actually coming for them. I see you. Hold on. Below, the staff sergeant with the bloodied arm lifted his good hand and gave a single, small wave, more disbelief than greeting. Emily didn't wave back. She never did, mid-mission. But something in her chest loosened half an inch, the first given 4 minutes of held breath. Overwatch, she said quietly. Tell your extraction team I've got eyes on a possible second shooter, West Ridge, unconfirmed. Tell them to come in low and fast, not the pretty way. The extraction helicopters came in exactly the way she'd asked, low, fast, ugly, kicking up a wall of dust that swallowed the ravine whole. Emily held high cover, circling wide, watching the terrain around the landing zone with a focus that hadn't wavered once in 6 minutes. Wraith, ground team is down. Loading survivors now. Copy. I've still got nothing confirmed on that West Ridge, but I don't like the silence. Silence, in her experience, was rarely actually silent. It was usually just the sound of something waiting. She kept her circle tight, fuel gauge ticking lower, patience burning at the same rate as everything else. 45 seconds. A minute. The dust from the rotor wash began to settle, and through the haze she could see the shapes of the extraction team moving fast, carrying, not walking. Wraith, survivors secured. Wheels up in 10 seconds. Copy. I'll stay high until you clear the corridor. The helicopters lifted, banking hard away from the ravine, and Emily fell into position slightly behind and above them, still scanning the west ridge out of habit more than expectation now. Nothing moved. Whatever had fired that first missile had either fled or was smart enough to know a second shot would give away a position it wanted to keep. Overwatch, Wraith. Extraction is clear of the corridor. Returning to base, fuel state is getting thin. Copy, Wraith. And, good work out there. She didn't answer right away. There was a version of her, 6 years younger, who would have said something back. Something with more feeling in it. That version had learned, somewhere along the way, that it was easier to just fly the plane home. Copy, Overwatch, she said instead. Wraith, RTB. The desert scrolled beneath her, empty and indifferent, and for the first time since the tarmac that morning, Emily let herself exhale. One long breath, held since a man named Hoffman told her this mission wasn't for instructors. The flight back felt longer than the flight out, the way returns always do, adrenaline draining out of a body that no longer needs it, leaving something duller and heavier in its place. Emily ran her post-mission checklist by rote, eyes flicking across gauges that told her everything was fine now, everything was over, and she still didn't quite believe it. That was normal. It always took a while. Holloman Tower, Wraith, requesting straight in, fuel state minimal. Wraith, Holloman Tower, cleared straight in, runway 23. Be advised, you've got a welcoming committee. She frowned faintly behind her mask. Copy, Tower. Come again? You'll see, Wraith. She didn't have the fuel margin to ask twice. She lined up on final, gear down, flaps set, the runway growing steady and familiar in her windscreen, and touched down with the same unhurried precision she used to teach cadets on Tuesday mornings, smooth, controlled, no wasted motion. As she taxied off the runway toward the hangar, she saw it. Not a small crowd. A crowd. Ground crew. Cadets, still in their flight suits from the morning's training schedule. A handful of officers she recognized and several she didn't. Hoffman stood near the front, clipboard nowhere in sight, standing straighter than she'd seen him stand all day. She shut the engine down, and the silence that followed felt enormous. By the time she popped the canopy, the crowd had gone quiet in a way that made her stomach tighten more than the missile lock had. She climbed down the ladder slowly, helmet under one arm, and found herself facing a wall of people who all seemed to be waiting for something she wasn't sure she had. Ryan stood near the front of the group, the cadet she'd failed and then passed, staring at her like he'd never actually seen her before today. Maybe he hadn't. Nobody spoke for a moment. Emily stood there in a sweat-soaked flight suit, hair plastered to her forehead, waiting for someone to break whatever this silence was. It was Hoffman who moved first. He crossed the tarmac at a pace just short of a jog and stopped in front of her, and for a second she genuinely didn't know what he was about to do. He saluted. Not the loose, obligatory kind. A real one, held a beat too long, the kind reserved for something he clearly didn't have the right words for yet. Captain Foster, he said, then stopped, then started again. Wraith. I owe you an apology, and I don't know if it's going to be enough. You don't owe me anything, Major. Her voice was tired now, stripped of the flat calm she'd worn in the cockpit. You were doing your job. You didn't know. I told you the mission wasn't for instructors. His jaw worked for a second. I was standing on that tarmac telling a woman who'd flown 71 classified sorties that she wasn't qualified for a tasking order with her own name buried in it. Someone near the back of the crowd, the technical sergeant from the comm desk, made a small sound that might have been a laugh if the moment had allowed for one. Emily looked past Hoffman, at the crowd of faces watching her, crew chiefs who'd fueled her jet without knowing what she used to be, cadets who'd sat through her lectures on energy maneuverability without any idea their instructor had lived it in combat, Ryan standing frozen at the edge of it all, still holding the stack of folders from 20 minutes ago like he'd forgotten what they were for. "I need someone to debrief the mission," she said quietly, deflecting the way she always did. "And I need water. Not this." She gestured vaguely at the assembled crowd, at Hoffman's held salute, at all of it. Hoffman lowered his hand slowly. "Yes, ma'am. Right away." Word moved through Holloman the way it always does on a small base, fast, distorted, growing new details with every retelling. By the time Emily made it to the debrief room, half-truths were already circulating about what had happened over that ravine, each one a little more dramatic than the last. She sat through the actual debrief flatly, without embellishment, the way she'd flown the mission, just the facts, times, coordinates, threat assessments, nothing more. A colonel she didn't recognize sat in on the last 20 minutes, arms crossed, watching her with the particular attention of someone rereading a file he'd clearly pulled up on his tablet an hour ago. "Captain Foster," he said, once the junior officers had filed out. "Your instructor assignment here, that was requested. By you." "Yes, sir. Most people in your position ask for a transfer somewhere warmer. You asked for a training wing in the New Mexico desert." It wasn't quite a question. Emily considered how much of an answer he actually wanted. "I asked for somewhere quiet, sir." This was quiet. He agreed, with something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "It won't stay that way. You understand that." She did understand it. She'd understood it the moment she'd read the words radio call sign on file that morning, 6 hours and a lifetime ago. Quiet didn't last. It never had, not really. It had just been borrowed time, and the loan had come due today on a tarmac in front of a major who didn't know her name yet. "Sir, permission to ask a question." "Go ahead." "The 2 survivors. Hatchet 2. Are they stable?" "Both of them. One's got a broken arm and a story he's going to be telling for the rest of his career." The colonel closed the folder in front of him. "They asked who flew cover. Command told them it was classified." A pause. "That's not going to hold for long either." Emily looked down at her hands, still faintly trembling now that the adrenaline had fully drained out, for hours after the fact. "It doesn't need to hold forever, sir," she said quietly. "Just long enough for me to finish tomorrow's flight lesson." She didn't sleep that night. Not really. She lay on the narrow bed in her quarters listening to the base go quiet around her, the way it always did after 2200, and stared at the ceiling replaying the radar warning tone in her head, that half-second of silence before the missile launch alarm that had felt longer than the whole rest of the mission combined. Around midnight, there was a knock at her door. Soft, hesitant, the kind of knock that belonged to someone who wasn't sure they should be there at all. It was Ryan. "Sorry, Captain, ma'am. I saw your light on." He stood in the hallway in a t-shirt and sweatpants, looking younger than he had on the flight line. "I couldn't sleep either." Emily leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, and didn't invite him in, but didn't send him away either. "You've got a flight lesson at 0700. "I know." He hesitated. I failed my first instrument check with you. You wrote in the eval that I rushed my scan. That I didn't trust my instruments over my gut." He looked at her carefully, like he was trying to reconcile 2 different people standing in the same body. "Is that what you did today? Trusted your instruments?" Emily thought about the radar-locked tone, the missile warning, the half-second of silence that could have meant anything. She thought about all the things she hadn't told the colonel in the debrief, because they weren't the kind of thing that fit cleanly into a report. "No," she said finally. "Today I trusted something instruments can't measure." Ryan waited for her to explain. She didn't. "Get some sleep, Ryan. I'll see you at 0700. Same lesson plan as always, nothing's changed." He looked like he wanted to argue that everything had changed, but something in her face told him not to push it. He nodded and disappeared down the hallway, and Emily closed her door and finally, for the first time since the tarmac that morning, let her hand rest against the thin white scar along her collarbone without pretending she wasn't touching it. The scar had a story nobody at Holloman had ever heard, not even the version she'd tell if pressed. It wasn't from the mission 6 years ago that had earned her the call sign Wraith, it was from before that, a training accident during a program that had shaped everything that came after it. The reason she'd learned to fly the way she flew, economical, precise, no wasted motion, because the first time she'd wasted motion in a cockpit it had nearly killed her. She'd never told anyone that. Not Hoffman. Not the colonel. Not even, fully, herself, most days. Tonight, lying awake with the adrenaline finally bleeding out of her system, she let herself think about it for the first time in longer than she wanted to admit. The sound the canopy had made, the smell of hydraulic fluid and something burning, the 23-year-old version of herself who'd walked away from a wreck with a scar and a lesson she'd spent the rest of her career trying to teach other people without ever explaining where it came from. You survive by being economical. You survive by not panicking when the instruments lie to you. You survive by trusting the part of yourself that doesn't shake, even when everything else does. That was the lesson she'd built her entire teaching career around, and not one cadet at Holloman had ever known it came from a night she didn't talk about. Maybe that was the real reason she'd asked for a quiet training wing in the desert. Not to hide from what she used to be, but to spend the rest of her career making sure other pilots learned the lesson the easy way, from a classroom, instead of learning it the way she had. She finally drifted off somewhere near 0300, and if she dreamed, she didn't remember it by morning. The mission wasn't finished, not administratively, not in the way the Air Force finishes things. 3 days later, a summons came through official channels, requesting Captain Emily Foster report to a secure facility off base for a formal debrief with personnel she wasn't cleared to name to anyone at Holloman. Hoffman drove her there himself, mostly silent for the first 20 minutes of the drive. "Can I ask you something?" he finally said, eyes on the road. "You can ask." "Are you going back?" "To whatever this was before." "Full-time." He glanced at her. "They're going to want you back, aren't they? After today." Emily watched the desert roll past the window, the same flat, endless country she'd been staring at for 4 years, trying to convince herself it was enough. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I asked for the quiet life once already. I don't know if I get to ask for it twice." Hoffman didn't say anything else for a while. When he did, his voice had lost the sharp, defensive edge from that first morning on the tarmac completely. "For what it's worth," he said. "I've been in the Air Force 12 years. I've never seen anyone fly like that. Not in training footage, not in briefings, nowhere." He paused. "I don't think you should feel like you have to choose between the two things you are." Emily almost smiled. "Almost. That's not really how it works, Major." "Dave," he said. "You can call me Dave. I think we're past the rank thing after Tuesday." She looked at him for a long moment, something loosening slightly in her chest, not quite trust, not yet, but the beginning of something adjacent to it. "Dave," she agreed. "Fine. But the mission's still classified. Even from you. I wouldn't expect anything less from Wraith." The debrief facility was exactly what she remembered from 6 years ago, gray walls, no windows, the particular hum of climate control fighting against desert heat. A woman she didn't recognize sat across the table from her, a colonel's insignia on her collar and a stack of files thick enough to represent most of Emily's adult life. Captain Foster. Or should I say Wraith? The colonel's tone wasn't unkind, just precise. "You understand why you're here?" "I have a guess, ma'am. We'd like to discuss reactivating your operational designation. Not full-time. Not immediately. But on an as-needed basis, for taskings that require your specific skill set and clearance history." The colonel slid a single sheet of paper across the table. This isn't an order. It's a request. You can say no. Emily looked at the paper without picking it up. 6 years ago she would have signed it before the colonel finished the sentence. 4 years ago, teaching her first flight lesson at Holloman, she would have burned it. Now, she wasn't sure which version of herself was sitting in this chair. What happens to my instructor position if I say yes? You keep it. This designation runs parallel, not instead of. We've done it before with other operators who wanted, the colonel paused, choosing the word carefully, a quieter cover between taskings. A quieter cover. Emily almost laughed at that. As if 4 years of teaching cadets how to read an attitude indicator had been a cover story, and not the realest thing she'd built for herself since the accident that left her with a scar and a philosophy about economical motion. I have cadets, she said slowly. One of them has his check ride in 3 weeks. I'm not walking out on that. Nobody's asking you to walk out on anything, Captain. We're asking if you're willing to be found again, when it matters. The colonel's eyes held hers, steady. You found this one on your own, 3 days ago. We'd rather you have the choice next time, instead of an order dropped on you cold. Emily reached out and picked up the pen. She signed it without ceremony, the same way she did most things that mattered, quietly, without asking anyone to witness it. The drive back to Holloman was quieter than the drive out had been. Hoffman didn't ask what had happened in the debrief room, and Emily didn't offer. Some things, she was learning, were going to stay classified even between people who'd started calling each other by their first names. They arrived back on base as the sun was dropping low over the runway, gold light stretching long shadows across the tarmac where, 3 days ago, a staff car had pulled up somewhere it wasn't supposed to be and changed everything. Ryan was waiting near the flight line when they pulled in, still in his flight suit from a training sortie earlier that afternoon. He jogged over as she climbed out of the car. Ma'am, Captain, I passed my check ride. He was grinning, the exhausted, relieved grin of a cadet who'd finally stopped being scared of his instrument scan. Instructor said I flew it clean. No hesitation. Something in Emily's chest eased, warm and simple in a way that nothing from the last 3 days had been. Good, she said. That's good, Ryan. Are you? He hesitated, glancing at Hoffman, then back at her. Are you still going to be my instructor? For the advanced course? Emily looked at him for a long moment. This kid who'd failed his first check right under her, who'd knocked on her door at midnight 3 nights ago trying to understand what he'd witnessed on the flight line, who had no idea the woman correcting his instrument scan next week might disappear on a classified tasking with 6 hours notice and reappear without explanation. Yeah, she said finally. I'm still your instructor. It wasn't the whole truth. But for the first time in 4 years, it wasn't a lie either. It was just one true thing sitting quietly alongside another one, the way she'd learned, a long time ago, that 2 things could both be real at once. 2 weeks passed, and Holloman settled back into something resembling its old rhythm. Cadets ran their patterns, ground crews turned wrenches, and Emily stood at the edge of the flight line each morning with a cooling cup of coffee, watching young pilots try not to bend the landing gear. The difference was in the details. Crew chiefs who'd once nodded past her now made a point of asking how her morning was. Cadets who'd never looked twice at their instructor's file now looked at her like they were trying to see through her flight suit to whatever was underneath it. Nobody asked directly. The Air Force didn't work that way, and neither did she. Hoffman found her one afternoon by the hangar, 2 coffees in hand, and passed her one without asking if she wanted it. Colonel's office called, he said. Nothing urgent. Just confirming your parallel designation is logged correctly on your file now. No more clerical surprises. No more strangers pulling up in staff cars telling me the mission isn't for instructors, Emily said, and there was something almost like humor in it now, 3 days removed from raw and 2 weeks removed from exhausted. I deserved that. Hoffman leaned against the hangar wall beside her. For what it's worth, I looked up your actual sortie count. Officially, anyway, the parts that aren't still sealed. And I stopped counting somewhere past 50 and just felt like an idiot for the rest of the afternoon. Emily allowed herself the smallest smile, the kind that didn't reach for anything, didn't perform for anyone. You weren't an idiot, Dave. You just didn't have the whole file. Most people don't. Do you ever wish they did? She considered the question longer than he expected. Sometimes, she admitted. Mostly I like being the person cadets see land a jet on a Tuesday morning, not the file that comes with a redacted paragraph. She looked out at the runway, gold with afternoon light. That's the part one actually get to keep. The staff sergeant she'd covered from the ravine, the one with the broken arm, tracked her down almost a month later, showing up unannounced at Holloman with his arm still in a sling and a look on his face like he'd rehearsed what he wanted to say the entire drive over and forgotten most of it anyway. His name was Nathan Barrett, and he found her in the flight room going over a lesson plan for the next morning's cadets. Captain Foster. He stood a little awkwardly in the doorway. I don't actually know if that's your name or not. Nobody would tell me. It's my name, Emily said, setting down her pen. Wraith's a call sign. Foster's mine. Right. He shifted his weight. I just wanted to say thank you. In person. I know that's not really how this works, classified and all, but I asked around until someone pointed me toward Holloman, and I figured I'd take the chance. You didn't need to drive out here for that. I did, actually. His voice caught slightly. My daughter's 4. I have a wife who was 3 hours from getting a phone call nobody comes back from, and instead she got to pick me up from the base hospital with a broken arm and a story I still don't fully understand. He met her eyes. So yeah. I needed to drive out here for that. Emily didn't have a practiced response for this part. This wasn't a debrief, wasn't a mission report, wasn't something she could answer with clinical precision. I'm glad you made it home to her, she said finally, simply, and meant every word of it. Nathan nodded, like that was enough, like it was more than he'd expected. He held out his good hand, and she shook it. For what it's worth, he said, the guys on the ground team have a name for you now. Not the call sign. Something else. What's that? The ghost who stayed. He shrugged, almost embarrassed. Figured you should know. She thought about that name more than she expected to, in the weeks after, not because it was dramatic, but because it was accurate in a way most things people said about her weren't. She had stayed. That was the whole of it, distilled down to 5 words by a man with a broken arm and a daughter who still had her father. Hoffman asked her once, over coffee on the flight line, why she'd stayed in the corridor as long as she had, past the point protocol would have justified pulling out. Because leaving felt like a decision I wasn't willing to live with, she said. There's a difference between calculated risk and calculated abandonment. I know where that line is. I've known it a long time. Since the scar? He asked, carefully, the first time he'd ever referenced it directly. Emily's hand moved instinctively toward her collarbone before she stopped it. Since the scar, she agreed, and didn't elaborate, and Hoffman, to his credit, didn't push. Some things stayed sealed even between people who trusted each other. That was fine. That was, she'd come to believe, how most people actually built trust, not by unsealing everything at once, but by choosing, again and again, what to hand over and what to keep. The base had mostly returned to normal. The rumors had calcified into base legend, the kind cadets would tell each other in hushed, exaggerated versions for years after Emily herself had transferred somewhere else, or retired, or simply faded back into the quiet she'd built for herself. She didn't mind the legend. She minded, slightly, that none of the versions she overheard ever got the technical details right. Nobody in the retellings ever mentioned chaff density or terrain following radar minimums, just vague, thrilling nonsense about dogfights that had never happened. She let it go. The story wasn't really hers to correct. It belonged to the flight line now, the way all good legends eventually stopped belonging to the person who lived them. On a quiet Thursday morning almost 2 months after the mission, Ryan found her at the hangar before sunrise, both of them early for a training flight neither particularly needed to be early for. "Can I ask you something?" he said, echoing, without knowing it, almost exactly what Hoffman had asked her weeks before. "You can ask. Do you miss it? Whatever it was you used to do full-time." He hesitated. "I don't mean the classified parts. I mean, the flying. That kind of flying." Emily looked out at the runway, empty and gray in the pre-dawn light, and thought about the honest answer versus the comfortable one, and decided, for once, to give him the honest one. "Every day," she said. "But I don't miss what came with it as much as I miss the flying itself. And most days, teaching someone like you not to rush their instrument scan feels like it matters just as much." She glanced at him. "Different kind of saving people. Just as real." Ryan absorbed that quietly, the way he'd learned to absorb most of what she told him, without pushing for more than she was willing to give. "I heard the ground team calls you something," he said carefully. "The ghost who stayed." Emily allowed herself a small, tired smile. "I heard that too." "Is it true?" "Parts of it." She checked her watch, then nodded toward the jet on the ramp behind him. "Cadet blue paint scheme, nothing classified about it at all. Go do your walk around, Ryan. We've got a lesson to fly, and I promise you, this one's not going to make the base legend." He grinned and jogged toward the aircraft, and Emily stood alone on the tarmac for one more moment, coffee cooling in her hand, watching the sun come up over a life she'd built twice now, once by accident, and once, harder, on purpose. She never stopped being Rafe. She just got better, over time, at being both things at once, the quiet instructor cadets underestimated on sight, and the pilot a downed reconnaissance crew would remember for the rest of their lives as the one who stayed circling overhead when protocol said to leave. Hoffman never called her ma'am again without meaning it fully. Ryan finished his advanced course 6 months later and requested, of all the instructors on base, her as his evaluator for his final check ride, and passed it clean, no hesitation, the same way he'd flown his instrument check months before. And somewhere in a sealed file that only unseals for one specific type of tasking, her name sat waiting, quiet and patient, for the next time the Air Force needed someone who could fly a corridor no one else had flown 14 times before. She didn't wait for that call. She didn't dread it either. She just kept teaching, kept flying cadets through their patterns on ordinary Tuesday mornings, kept the coffee cooling in her hand at the edge of the flight line, because that was the part of her life she'd fought hardest to keep, and the part she intended to keep fighting for, no matter how many more times someone in a staff car showed up telling her a mission wasn't for instructors. They'd learn. They always did. If this story hit home, drop a comment below and tell us, would you have stayed circling that ravine, or pulled out when protocol told you to? Hit that like button, and subscribe for more unforgettable military and aviation stories. We'll see you in the next one.